Zero was rather indifferent to the online commentary that all his movies were crap. He knew the movies he produced were shallow and lacked depth, but that was the kind of film he liked: simple, straightforward, epic scenes, and visually exciting. Most importantly, they pleased his girlfriends. He felt good about them too. When he had launched a production company after graduation, he had been in it only for the experience. He hadn't thought that far ahead and was prepared to incur a loss. And yet he was able to break even. So eventually, Zero had become addicted. He did things his way, regardless of how the media and general public trashed him. Who cared what other people said? As his uncle once put it, how are you going to get through life without a bit of thick skin? But now, he no longer wanted to be a spectator. He wanted to act himself, to star in an epic love story and play an invincible hero who saved the world. Everyone aspired to be a hero. Zero actually quite envied the men and women of his generation who joined the military. He wasn't cut out for it and he didn't want to suffer, so he would fulfill his dream through a movie. That was much easier. He was ready to go all out. 10 million for a song, even if it was all for nothing, no problem. It was a movie built with cash. If he didn't like the song, so be it. He had thought about poaching the composer behind Define Punishment and Cocoon Breach to tailor a song for him, but sci-fi Wing had done a good job of keeping the musician under wraps. All he could do was wait. If he liked the third movement, then he would make a move on the composer. If not, he would blacklist sci-fi Wing and the composer and not work with them again. Zero was a big spender, but he wasn't stupid. If the song wasn't to his liking, he wasn't paying a cent. As for the plot of the movie, he didn't care. It was just a movie, after all. It just had to be entertaining. The story didn't matter. This year, it was an ordinary person who saved the world by defeating monsters, next year it'd be a mutant, and the year after the next it'd be a Superman. And then a monster battling other monsters the following year. It was all the same. For his 8th production, he was going to battle beasts in robot armor. How cool was that? His stunt double was doing all the fighting. All he had to do was show his handsome face at some point. Piece of cake. Zero had even named the film himself God of War. People teased after hearing the title, such hubris. Does his great-grandfather know? Zero's great-grandfather, the father of Li Zhao's current governor, had belonged to the famed God of War unit when he was a young soldier. He had gone on to a highly decorated career and served as the deputy commander of the Li Zhao military. Now he was an old man, more than 190 years old. He had stopped wading into family affairs a long time ago, ever since his son became governor of Li Zhao. Still, the old man wielded considerable influence. Every year, some of his former troops would pay him a visit. While Zero's father was ostracized every time his son loaned military vehicles and equipment for his movies, he was never purged. That wasn't entirely on account of Zero's grandfather, the governor. The top brass also felt they had to show respect for Zero's great-grandfather. As long as Zero's demands weren't too outlandish and he was willing to pay, they were willing to turn a blind eye. But Zero didn't think there was anything wrong with the title. He was starring this time. It wouldn't be worth the effort unless he crafted a heroic image for himself. As he was pondering the title, his agent ducked out to take a call, then scrambled back. The agent looked miffed. "Senior Master, we have a problem." "What now?" Zero asked. "King of Snipers has bumped up its release date to January 1st. No wonder his agent was so alarmed. The reason they had scheduled their movie for a January release was because there was little competition, only a few low-budget productions. Considering Zero's ability to generate buzz, they were confident about their box office returns. They weren't aiming high anyway. All they wanted was to break even. Zero himself was a walking advertisement. So many people followed his every move. He was a frequent topic of discussion even on other continents. Li Zhao Senior Master's new girlfriend revealed. Eligible bachelors on each continent you don't want to piss off. Senior Master Zero named Li Zhao Male Celebrity of the Year. The headlines never ended. Even though Zero didn't sing or act and had no other talents, the constant attention made him a bona fide celebrity in Li Zhao. News of Zero's starring role had dominated entertainment headlines for days. Interest was huge, so Zero's agent wasn't worried about the box office. This was the first time Senior Master had starred in a movie, so many people were curious. The movie didn't have to be a big hit. They just wanted to break even. But now, a genuine blockbuster that was scheduled for release in February had bumped up its release date to January. Somehow, this move seemed aimed at Zero. King of Snipers was a co-production by Li Zhao's two leading film studios. It featured an all-star lineup. Rumor was that it was awards bait. Movie fans were looking forward to it keenly, and films that catered to mass tastes and critics alike tended to have more depth and cultural significance. A great plot, top actors, and a big budget to boot, even outsiders could tell a movie like this was a box office guarantee that would also likely meet critical approval. So when news that King of Snipers was being released in February broke, Zero and company had breathed a sigh of relief. It was such good news that they didn't have to go up against such a Goliath. But now, King of Snipers was being bumped up. What could they do? The good thing was that they had never nailed down their release date. They had announced a January release, but they could still push it back to February. All they had to do was come up with an excuse to feed the press. Zero also started getting calls from members of his family. Yes, uncle. What is it? Zero, have you heard that King of Snipers is bumping up its release date? Why don't you push back your release date by a month? Zero hung up before his uncle finished. He sat on his chair pouting. Less than a minute later, another call came through. Zero took a quick glance at the caller ID and put the call through. What's so urgent, Auntie? If it's about my movie, stop now. Zero, don't be impulsive. Zero hung up again and threw his tablet to the floor. His terrified assistant tiptoed to the tablet and picked it up in case Senior Master wanted to keep using it. Zero was fuming. Everyone wanted him to back down, but he was no fool. The filmmakers behind King of Snipers wouldn't have bumped up their release date so publicly without the tacit approval of the Renault family. Zero was right. The move did in fact have the blessing of the Renault family. The point was to give Zero a reality check, to make him realize that his success was due to respect for the Renault family. The time had come to burst his bubble, to restrain his personality through hardship. Zero had too many enemies. He had publicly trashed several leading actors. In revenge, their agencies had banded together and coordinated with the Renault family. The release date for King of Snipers was advanced after the Renaults gave the go-ahead. Members of the Renault family, including Zero's father, had spoken privately of wanting to teach Zero a lesson, within reason. Just a bit of real competition would do. They didn't want to overdo it. If the Renault family ended up losing face, other family members wouldn't sign off on the move. The Renault family didn't own the continent outright, but it was an indisputable fact that it was still the most powerful family in Lizhou. And they were still a prominent force 500 years into the new era. That showed how united they were on key issues. The shrewd operators in business and entertainment knew how far to push things. In the Lizhou capital, several investors that backed King of Snipers were kidding around in an office. It's time to let Zero know that the only reason his movies made money and broke even in the past is because we gave way on account of his family name. We never complained. We even cracked down on the naysayers. But he should be more mature and not just mouth off without regard to our reputations. Let's let him find out what real competition feels like. What else was there to Zero's movies except for buzz and military hardware? They were total crap. Zero was the target of their sniping. The gap in quality is obvious when there's a contrast to Zero's films. People like Zero are a nuisance who poison the industry. It's time we industry elders come out and restore order. News of the earlier release date for King of Snipers generated a massive response in the Lizhou entertainment industry. God of War had also announced a January release, so these two hotly discussed films were going up against each other. Except the quality of the former was guaranteed. You could tell from the names of the director, the screenwriter, the actors, and the production companies. As for the latter, everyone knew what to expect. After King of Snipers announced its release date, wireless media kept putting off a formal announcement on the release date for God of War, leading to speculation that Zero was going to cave and push back his movie. Looks like God of War won't be screening in January, the editor of a local magazine told a friend in private. It's the right move to back down. This is no time to cling on, even if he's a Renault. I'm sure other members of the family have long taken issue with him. Yeah, you need to pick your battles. Being too aggressive and egotistical does you no good. He's in his 20s now. It's time to grow up. Zero has caused too much trouble already. Even other members of the Renault family can't stand him. And it's quite the lesson. Zero is going to get his ass kicked, isn't he? Let's hope that Senior Master can learn his lesson. But given Senior Master's personality, will he back down? Others speculated. Zero acted like he was king of Lizhou. He was used to having his way. Was he going to back down over a slight hiccup like this? Wireless Media Headquarters. Senior Master, should we have someone rework the script? Zero's agent asked. No, we're almost done with the shoot. How can we change the script now? Zero let out an eerie laugh. You wanna mess with me? This mofo isn't going anywhere. Let's check with Sci-Leveler Wing and see when the third movement will be completed. Sensing Zero's determination, his agent gave up and called one of Duan Qianji's assistants. After being briefed by her assistant, Duan Qianji asked Feng Zhao, "You're positive you'll be done before January?" "Yes." "That's great." After getting off the phone with Feng Zhao, Duan Qianji issued her orders, "We're sticking to our plan. The third movement will be released on January 1st. Get word to wireless media that we'll deliver the third movement in late December." Zero's agent looked ashen when he heard back. His wistful thinking that Sci-Leveler Wing might not meet its January deadline was dashed. He didn't want to lie, so he relayed Duan Qianji's message to Zero unfiltered. "That's great. Then let's set our release date for January 1st. I'm not backing down an inch." Zero kicked his feet up and started fidgeting hard. "Have the production team hurry up. Let's wrap things up by the end of December. We'll announce the release date now. I'm going head-to-head with them." The result of the matchup didn't matter. He didn't care about the box office. He just wanted to stick to his guns. This mofo ain't backing down. The movie Zero was starring in was on a tight production schedule. In contrast to the film itself and the buzz it generated, the score was hardly mentioned. No one cared who wrote the score apart from a select few members of the music industry. When the token few music publications did discuss the score, all that appeared was a passing reference that the composer was a non-local and speculation over where the composer was from. No one bothered to delve further. Wireless media simply said they had signed a composer without identifying the person. While the entire Lizhou entertainment industry was following the production closely, so was the entertainment press corps in Yanzhou. Sci-Leveler Wing had issued a statement saying that the third movement of the 100-year period of destruction series was scheduled to be released at 8 a.m. on January 1st. The first movement, Divine Punishment, had launched on October 1st in the 531st year of the new era. The second chapter, Cock and Breach, had followed a month later. Yet there was a 2-month gap between the release of the second and third movements. The long production cycle suggested Sci-Leveler Media had gone all out and had high expectations for the single. If the second movement revealed Sci-Leveler Wing's ambition, then the third chapter would be a testimony to its staying power. Every member of the Yanzhou entertainment industry was waiting to see how explosive the combination of a virtual idol and an epic pop series would be. Many fans left messages on the message boards on Sci-Leveler Wing's official website. Some were fans of epics, others simply curious. Another group was Polar Light's fans. The latter group was more interested in the music video than the music. What they cared about most was whether Polar Light would star in the video and if Polar Light merchandise would be released. Sci-Leveler Wing assigned dedicated staffers to monitoring the message boards. They even put 2 staffers on the message board for Polar Light. Their job was to identify the most common questions and post responses. Recently, the message board monitor started noticing a 4th demographic. When is the third movement coming out? It's almost exam time. Hurry up. Hurry, hurry. We have to wait until January 1st. So late? Thank God, it'll be released just in time. Our exams won't have happened yet. I hope the third movement is even better. That way I'll have more motivation. Underscore 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 underscore. Messages of this kind suggested the authors were students. And if you listen to the voice messages, you would notice that many of the voices sounded quite young. Some were clearly prepubescent, others going through puberty. Secondary school students. How come they were all secondary students? Did you guys hire fake fans? The message board monitors asked their marketing and PR colleagues. Even if we did, we wouldn't hire that many secondary students. Their colleagues were clueless too. Speaking of secondary students, I think they have final exams in January, a message board monitor said. Speaking of exams, they were reminded of the news coverage back in November about the popularity of the second movement among secondary students. When the second movement, Cocoon Breach, was released, it was midterm time at most Yanzhou secondary schools. Students were looking for inspiration, so they preferred songs that were up-tempo or loud. Cocoon Breach was the most popular choice. The students were still young and lacked professional music training, so they couldn't appreciate the subtle and painful evolution of emotions in Cocoon Breach, but that didn't prevent them from being moved by the explosive parts of the song. This was a psychological process, to put it more bluntly, it was a stimulant of sorts. The climaxes in the song had an awakening effect, dispelling any trace of laziness or weariness. During their midterms, the students used the second movement to stimulate themselves. But they forgot all about the song when they finished their exams. There were too many other things that captured their attention. Other than music, they had video games and other forms of entertainment. Now the term was nearing its end, and the academic calendar showed that finals were imminent. Finals were even more important than midterms. If the students didn't do well, they would be scolded for starters. Winter break and Chinese New Year would be torture. No red packets stuffed with cash, no gifts. They would also be forced to do more problem sets and have their internet access restricted. What a bummer. So how about sucking it up and cramming for a few days? There was little incentive. As exam dates approached, some students tried to seek inspiration in song. They searched for songs that resembled Cocoon Breach. Unfortunately, repeated searches yielded few matches. An online news search revealed that more chapters were forthcoming in the 100-year period of destruction series, but they got tired of waiting. So the students started complaining on Sci-Fi Wing's official website in droves. The students could have returned to the second chapter, but listening to the same song over and over again was exhausting. The stimulation effect also diminished. That defeated the purpose of listening to the song in the first place, so now they were hoping that Sci-Fi Wing would release the third movement soon so they would have a stimulant for their finals. The third movement became the focus of their attention. Whenever they were free, they would flood the Sci-Fi Wing message boards with messages demanding the third movement be released. When Sci-Fi Wing finally announced the release date, they still showed up every day in the message boards to count down. So every time the message board monitor spotted a countdown message, they knew it was the secondary students again. The two polar light monitors thought they were just secondary students, adorable in their own way. As former secondary students, they could empathize. Plus, finals were around the corner and the pressure was immense. Finding a way to vent was totally understandable. Let them be. But as the day passed, the two monitors realized they were being naive. The number of secondary students grew, and they showed up at the same time every day, as if by appointment. Leaving a countdown message had become part of their daily routine. Initially, it was only a few people, but as the group grew, it became a nuisance. The message board monitors had to select representative questions and post answers. But now, the questions had been overwhelmed by countdown messages, which had to be filtered. It was too much trouble. The monitors decided to take action to stamp out the nonsense. The students who showed up to leave countdown messages the next day noticed a new announcement: the number of countdown messages would be capped to maintain order. So many countdown messages ended up being deleted. The monitors were relieved to find their message boards less cluttered. Now it was easier to browse fan questions. But in a few days, the two monitors noticed the secondary students had started leaving countdown messages on behalf of entire classes. Second year class number 7 of Kin number 1 secondary school reporting for duty. 9 days until the release of the third movement. Third year class number 1 of Kin number 12 secondary school reporting for duty. Second year class number 4 of Yenshi number 5 secondary school reporting for duty. Fourth year class number 2 of Gongshu number 3 secondary school reporting for duty. Wait, I'm from Yenshi too. Fellow students from Yenshi number 5 secondary school, any sign of our friends from number 6 secondary school. Second year class number 8 of Yenshi number 6 secondary school reporting for duty. Anyone from third year class number 2 of Yenshi number 6 secondary school. Please sign in on my behalf too. Friends from second year class number 7 of Kin number 1 secondary school, we're from class number 8. Underscore 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 underscore. Some of the older fans were amused. They asked in a patronizing tone, "Aren't you afraid of being banned again?" The students thought, they have a point, there were so many secondary schools in Yanzhou. Every school had 6 grades and every grade about a dozen classes, even more in certain areas. The numbers added up. The message board monitors didn't say what the cap was. If the students pressed on, they could very well be banned. So, 2 days later, they tweaked the wording in their messages. Second years at Yenshi number 6 secondary school reporting for duty. 7 days until the release of the third movement. Third years at Kin number 12 secondary school reporting for duty. Second years at Kin number 1 secondary school reporting for duty. Wait, when were you chosen to speak on behalf of second years at Kin number 1 secondary school? Which class do you belong to? Class number 1. What, you got a problem? This info is from class number 8. Yeah, I got a problem. See you at the gym after class. See you there. Don't chicken out. Underscore 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 underscore. Reading the deluge of new messages, the monitors went from surprised to dumbfounded. What's up with these secondary students? Do they have too much free time on their hands? Empha this, empha that, how old do they think they are? Have you done your homework? Have you finished memorizing your passages? Done with your problem sets? Do you know what you want to do with your lives? The two message board monitors were baffled by the influx of group countdown messages. They couldn't delete one and not the other without pissing off one side. These secondary students didn't have the best of tempers. If they weren't careful, they could spark a war of words. If complaints of unfair treatment were lodged, their pay could be docked. But curious bystanders were mighty amused. An epic lover who was more than 100 years old commented, "It's good to be young." Initially, only students from Kin, Yanxi, Gonggukshu, and a few other larger cities left messages. But soon the trend spread. Yandong, Yan and Yanbi, Jinging, and even the remote Mugu, their secondary students started showing up too. Some students just wanted to join the fray out of mob mentality. And when one grade at a school left a message, other grades followed suit. Rival schools in the same city couldn't leave their voices unheard. Secondary school students from other cities also joined in to prove their existence. 6 days until the release. 5 days. 4 days. 3 days. Underscore 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 underscore. Faced with all the fun the students were having at their expense, the two message monitors wanted time to speed up. Once the third movement was released, the craziness would stop. A day before the release, the two monitors each took a deep breath, looked at each other, and smiled. It's finally time. 532nd year of the new era. January 1st. First day of a brand new year. Silivler Wing Tower, 50th floor. Peng Pusong was feeling nervous. He was not even able to gauge how he had performed. When recording was underway for the third movement, Feng Zhao's demands were even greater than before. Over the past month or so, Peng Pusong had been practicing every day, sometimes even taking a week or two just to perfect a single verse. He had not even heard the final product and could only wait for the music video to be released. The nervousness was not limited to Peng Pusong. The entire virtual idol department was jittery. Returning from their vacation after the second movement was released, the team had worked overtime for more than a month. The second movement decided whether they would succeed. The third movement was to see how far they could go. Having experienced the sweet taste of success, even without Feng Zhao's instructions, the motivated team pushed themselves harder. When tired, they would head to the gaming room to relax a little before sleeping, continuing to work the moment they woke. Silivler Wing Media had assembled a backup technical team to lend their support should the virtual idol department require additional resources. Therefore, the team needed not worry about being short-handed, lacking funds, or welfare. All they needed to do was complete the tasks that Feng Zhao assigned. As for how the final product would turn out, all they could do was believe in their project head. Zhang Huang was woken up by an alarm. As he emerged from his room, he did not see Feng Zhao anywhere, so he turned and asked Zhu Wen, "Where is Big Zhao?" In his office, Zhu Wen replied. Glancing around the department and seeing everyone, Zhang Huang asked, "Nobody went home yesterday?" "Of course not. Nobody would even be able to sleep," Zhu Wen replied with a yawn. Zhu Wen went to wash his face before taking a seat in the office along with the rest of the team, waiting for the clock to hit 8. Everyone left Feng Zhao alone. It was evident that, during the composition and arrangement of the third movement, Feng Zhao's temperament had not been great. Just as actors needed time to get out of character after a movie, a composer who poured his emotions and soul into his work needed some time to get the emotions out of his system. Thus, all Zhang Huang and Zhu Wen could do was complete the tasks at hand, leaving Feng Zhao with less to worry about. In the newcomer department, Chu Guang was rather unperturbed seeing Polar Light taking the #1 spot of the label's marketing plan for the month. In the final season of the previous year, he had already been crowded out to #5 on the New Pioneers chart. Still, it was a cause for celebration that the third movement had not been released in December. Otherwise, the #5 spot might not have even been his. After Divine Punishment and Cocoon Breach, the third movement, Mission, was also about to be released on public channels. The quantity of downloads would not be lacking either. Neon Culture and Tongshan True Entertainment no longer seemed like they wanted to compete against Polar Light, focusing instead on promoting their two biggest stars, the virtual idols Miyu and Andy Liu. Are they giving up on the newcomer scene? Whatever the reason, for Chu Guang, two less virtual idols to compete against was a good thing. At the top floor of Sci-Leveler Wing Tower, Duan Quanji and the other senior executives were gathered in the conference room to watch the official release of the third movement's music video on the projection system upon its release. Amongst them, only Duan Quanji had heard the final cut and watched the completed music video. The rest were seeing it themselves for the first time. All the staff from Sci-Leveler Wing Media already at the office or on the way to work, regardless of whether they were singers, actors, technical staff, or from operations, were eagerly monitoring the development to come at 8 a.m. Alone in his office, Feng Zhao pulled down the blinds to block out the sunlight. Turning on the projection system, at 8 a.m. sharp, it played the broadcast of the music video for the third movement. The third movement diverged from the modulating style of the previous two installments. Right from the start, a combination of string and woodwind discharged the distinct, surging grandeur of an epic. The music video picked up where the second movement had left off. The desolate blue sky full of haze seemed to be mourning. Lightning streaked across the skies amidst the thick clouds. Many silhouettes on the surface were running. Hurried and brief drum beats perfectly reflected the tense atmosphere. In between the brief drum beats, a familiar male voice began to sing a symphonic music and an opera combined in the background. Some new era musical styles were blended in as well, giving off a wild and primitive vibe, as if ready to strike. In the music video, the scene of a prelude to battle unfolded with the two sides at a standoff. With the horrific crises everywhere, the building tension was surging and billowing, threatening to overflow. A figure leapt into the sky, like an eagle soaring through the clouds. At a glance, its branches, seemingly knotted with what seemed distinctly like muscles, gave off the impression of raw and explosive power contained deep inside. With one foot, the falling figure trampled on the mutated beast at the front of the pack before brutally raining blows from his boulder-like fist onto the throat of the beast. Explosive drum beats, combined with the crackling electronic music, sounded like the crisp shattering of bone. It was not the sound produced from the instruments but rather the image and temperament that resonated with the viewers who, in turn, produced that bone-crushing sound in their own hearts. Soil and blood splattered in all directions. Some splashed onto the tree man's face and between his eyes. This diverted the attention of the viewers to his eyes. That pair of eyes radiated an immense murderous aura, akin to the violent fury of a ferocious beast shaken awake from its slumber. A bone-chilling sensation crept down the spines of the viewers witnessing this scene, insinuating doubts in their minds. Who were the mad ones? Was it the savage and violent mutated beasts, or was it the previously peace-loving and gentle tree man that wouldn't hurt a fly? This extreme change was not only limited to the figure of the tree man at the front. Around him, the other figures were emanating this murderous aura too. The shrill blare of a brass instrument signaled a variation as the string melody increased its vigor. The intense and frantic beats of the timpani portrayed an unyielding spirit. Compared to the first movement, the appearance and the temperament of the tree men had undergone a massive transformation. This was how they adapted to the battlefield in the Stark Age. Becoming what they were most adverse to was their way of resisting the cruel fate that befell them. In line with the expectations of all the people who followed the 100-year period of destruction series, the third movement had a theme of struggle and combat. Frantic alternating of the brass rhythm and woodwind variation set a fierce and intense tone of confrontations and close-quarter combat. The immense and visually stunning images, coupled with the perfectly synced accompaniment, continuously battered the hearts and souls of the viewers. The third movement was in no way weaker than its predecessors. The transformed trees and mutated beasts collided violently against the dark and gloomy sky. Despite it being a virtual image, it brought about a realistic and overwhelming sense of bitterness that transcended time. The timid and gentle tree men were long gone, drowned out by the continuous battle to determine their survival. In order to seek a peaceful land to call home, the tree men were willing to release their inhibitions and fight. From the highest mountains to the lowest valleys, a peaceful land was nowhere to be found, and danger was lurking in every corner. Only this time, in the third movement, they no longer held on to the depressed notion of resigning to their fate. The tree men started off timid and cowardly. Making a stand, they fought against their fate, and after countless battles, they grew numb to war and death. Throughout the journey, they lost some comrades but gained some new companions too. Finally, they found a relatively peaceful place, Polar Land. Blanketed by snow, Polar Land was a frigid and unforgiving place. Most viruses and mutated creatures were incompatible with the climate here. Ironically, this was the last pure land in the diseased world. Devoid of the reddish-brown smog and air pollutants, the sky here was clear. Sunlight shone freely in the day, and at night, the stars that were hidden for quite some time came out to play. On certain nights, the elusive colors of an aurora would flash across the sky. Like the calm after a storm, the intensity of the music receded. Ethereal sounds of a zither interweaving with the soothing flute gave the flustered spirits of listeners a moment to relax. This was a time for peace. Polar Land was a sanctuary for the tree men. A place where they could stay without worrying about dangers and mutated beasts lurking around every corner. This place might have been cold, but it was certainly safe. With slight smiles on their faces, a few young saplings were running stiffly on the snow-covered ground. When they were about to slip, a sturdy branch reached out and fished them up before setting the saplings down on its broad shoulders. The image and score induced a feeling of warmth in people's hearts. With this sort of backdrop, it seemed as if a scene of peace and stability was about to unfold. But for those watching the projection, they understood that Polar Land was just but a brief period in the true history of the period of destruction. Toward the later stages of the period of destruction, a summit meeting was held at Polar Land. Back then, the world had not been divided into the 12 continents, only war zones. Leaders from nearly 100 war zones had congregated for a comprehensive discussion on the war. This temporary period of peace was not the conclusion but a foretelling of the explosive finale that was to come. The music switched to a melancholy cello solo. While not absolutely safe, Polar Land was still a place of peace and tranquility compared to the various regions they had passed through. However, at the same time, this place was not suitable for them to have a normal livelihood. Most importantly, they no longer had to live like wandering nomads and could settle down. In the new era, most books regarding the history of the period of destruction had records and excerpts of the words spoken at that Polar Land summit meeting. Even though the original speakers were long forgotten, their words were passed down. We can end it all in our current generation. There is no need to leave it to the next. Since we are already at this point, what harm is there in staking it all on one last push? We have already become battle-hardened warriors and martyrs, but most importantly, we have also experienced a momentary period of peace. Whereas those born into this era, amidst fire and blood, have never known what peace is. The historical recording of the period of destruction might have been glossed over, but they were not fabricated randomly. Feng Zhao remembered that, back then, similar words were spoken. He himself might have spoken out too. Why are we not able to go back to living in our beloved homeland? Why do we have to give the world up? We are already strong, aren't we? In the projection, a group of tree men in the vast land of snow and ice gazed longingly at the heavens. Under the night sky adorned with stars, the magnificent aurora was like a bright and flickering flame lighting up the dark. The beating of a drum seemed to increase its intensity in layers, as if to emphasize a steadfast conviction. At the head of the group stood a familiar figure. His eyes were no longer clouded by madness and killing. Rather, in that moment of serenity, his eyes were filled with a slight reluctance and longing, as if parting ways with an old photograph. The flickering aurora gradually dissipated as night turned to day. Without any hint of reluctance, the lead tree man turned around to leave. The back of his wide trunk was full of scars. Nobody but himself knew that there was not a lot left in him. The next injury might be the last he could take before collapsing. Such was the burden he had to bear. Many of the other tree men were in the same situation. As long as their injuries did not hinder their movement, they joined in the ranks of the leaving. Some of the tree men were playing with the young saplings. Upon seeing the procession, they lifted the saplings from themselves, carefully placing them on the ground before heading to join the ranks. A tree man lightly pressed his finger against a sapling's forehead as if to prevent the young one from following. Soon after, he turned to leave, exchanging fist bumps with a fellow treeman heading in the same direction. With a slight smile, he headed out without glancing back. He was afraid that he would lose the courage to leave if he looked behind. The young sapling was puzzled observing the leaving figures. This was a safe place. The world outside was fraught with dangers. Why was everyone still leaving? The departing figures increased, joining the ranks of the leaving. All that was left were those old and weak tree men who were incapable of combat. Polar Land was harsh and unforgiving, but at the same time, it was still the safest place to be. A quick-paced string medley played, and paired with a unique sequence of electronic music, it set a tense atmosphere foreboding combat. In that dark period, against their chaotic and unreasonable destiny, they were forced to make a cruel choice. The aerial view of the numerous figures against the background of the snow-covered land formed a long, snaking line. The numbers were so great that it was not possible to see where the line began. A loud horn sounded along with the vigorous beats of the timpani. The increasing tempo and intensity washed away any downcast feelings. Alongside the dampening from the double bass and the woodwind score, the accompanying singing grew in stature. Just like the scene of the leaving procession, it was a display of extreme determination. Contained within was an immeasurable strength and hope. The volume of the chorus gradually increased as the footage left Polar Land, crossing over mountains and hills. The rustling and flapping sounds made listeners imagine a harsh and chilly wind. In the projection, a grayish figure was rushing across the land in leaps and bounds. In a flash, coming face to face with a mutated beast. He raised his branch arm as if swinging an axe. Throwing caution to the wind, with an unrestrained fury, he pierced the beast's chest. The combination of explosive sounds and music was a constant barrage to the ears. Freed of any apprehension, the tree men gave in to their unbridled and frantic madness and clashed against the beasts as broken twigs, bits of wood, and blood scattered everywhere. A fierce wind swept through the silhouettes of trees and beasts in the fight for survival. Viewers could apparently even smell the fresh blood and chipped wood. The thundering timpani was followed by a frantic clash of acoustics. The arrangement that ensued was complicated. An amalgamation of classical symphonies, new era music, church music, electronic music, even a military march amongst many other contrasting musical styles. It was as if a volcano that had been dormant for millions of years had suddenly erupted, triggering a tidal wave that could blanket the entire world. The principal color of the footage had gradually changed from a stifling blue to a brilliant yellow glow, the color of the sun shining through a layer of clouds, the brilliance of an intense blaze. The brightness of the projection had doubled since the beginning of the projection and was getting stronger. When are trees able to shine so brightly? When one has a burning desire. The projection faded as the deeply moving symphony came to an end. Lead character, Polar Light. Species, Longxing Tianluo. Song title, 100-Year Period of Destruction. Third movement, mission, producer, Feng Zhao. Production team, Polar Light Project Team, Feng Zhao, Zuwen, Song Miao, Peng Kusang, Zheng Huang, Wan Yue, Fu Yingtian, Stiller, Zhang Yu, Rodney. A Sci-Leveler Wing Media Release. Underscore. Feng Zhao turned off the projection and audio equipment before raising the blinds. He did not check the web for opinions, nor did he observe the number of downloads. Rather, he gazed out the window on the 50th floor of the tower, taking in the view. Reminiscing a conversation he'd once had with an old friend. What exactly is a mission? Who knows? When we are fighting here and there and we suddenly feel like we ought to do something. Without going through hardships, one would possibly never know how much one could change. People could transform into something they absolutely loathed, yet they could also become something worthy. In the beginning of that period of endless struggle, people fought in order to survive. Yet toward the end, accepting that they might not get to see the flourishing world they were fighting for, many still voluntarily participated in the fight, trading their lives so the future would burn much brighter. During that dark age, people were the real miracle. Feng Zhao had attended the summit at Polar Land in person. Ultimately, toward the later stage of the all-out war, he had died during a military campaign. During the period depicted at the end of the third movement, he had lost his life at the Qin War Zone, which would come to be known in the new era as Qin City, the center of Yanzhou, one of the 12 continents. Farewell, my old friends. At the same time, in the continent of Lizhou, with a 3-hour time difference. 8 a.m. in Yanzhou was roughly 11 a.m. in Lizhou. The first day of a new year was also the highly anticipated showdown of the two blockbusters the entire Lizhou entertainment community had been waiting for. However, wireless media had announced that God of War would be screened at 11 a.m. sharp on the January 1st. This piqued the curiosity of many. Rarely were there premiere screenings in the afternoon. Some believe that this was a disguised form of backing down. However, King of Snipers responded in the same way, pushing back the screening to 11 a.m. as well. Zero's agent had been very busy the past few days marketing God of War. Even though he did not have high hopes for the movie, in order to break even, he and his team had been generating as much buzz as they could. As long as there was enough buzz, lots of people would watch the movie, and when that happened, only then would they be able to recoup the expenditure. As the clock struck 11, all that he could possibly do was done. Whether the expenses could be recouped or not, he left that all up to the heavens. After post-production for the third movement had been completed, Sci-Leveler Wing Media had sent a copy to Zero. Zero was pleased with the music and was very satisfied with himself for making that decision. However, the score was just an accompaniment for a part of God of War. The movie's plot differed from that of the music video. Under normal circumstances, Zero would have just used it right away. This time, he was under heavy pressure and was taking his work seriously. Therefore, after discussing with Sci-Leveler Wing Media, he forked up another sum for the composer to make some changes in the arrangement to better fit the movie. Wireless media had no shortage of arrangers, however, Zero felt that the original composer would do the job better. On Tsai Wing's side, the adjustments were done personally by Feng Zhao after Duan Qianji had passed on a clip from God of War. In a movie scene, there would be an abundance of sounds. Should the musical score's arrangement be inappropriate, the sound effects of the movie and the score might affect or conceal the other. Therefore, when Feng Zhao was producing the revised version, he watched similar movie clips in order to blend it with the music. He made adjustments to the tone, pitch, and tempo, as well as the harmonizing and acoustics. Some of the electronic tones were removed and instead made use of the movie's sound effects for a seamless blend. On wireless media's side, the soundtrack did not garner much attention. Zero felt that the soundtrack was very suitable for his grand entrance. Zero's agent considered the soundtrack to be decent, but he didn't think it would impact the film much. As the clock approached 11 a.m., the staff of wireless media kept their eyes glued to the digital chart, paying attention to the sales for the premiere. Due to advancements in technology, projection equipment and sound systems had improved tremendously. Besides the major movie theaters in the commerce center of every city, most people could catch movies upon their release directly through the internet. Actual cinemas were a thing of the past, with the entire industry moving toward an online and virtual direction. People in every city of Lizhou had readied their projection equipment and prepared themselves. Most just wanted to see what sort of production the famous Zero Renault showcased this time. Some genuinely just wanted to view the film before writing reviews. Zero has specially invited a few of his close friends of the same ilk to watch the premiere in his own luxurious projection room. It's starting. Haha, let's see how Senior Master saves the world. Zero did not bother checking the amount of online marketing done. Although he was hedonistic, he certainly was not stupid. He knew that the movie could not compare to King of Snipers, but he had already made a stand and there was no backing down. Having achieved what he had set out to do, box office numbers and reviews were just secondary. Most people did not have high expectations for God of War. Just watching the trailer would give one the gist of the plot. In the end, it would just be the age-old plotline of the hero saving the damsel in distress and saving the world. According to people online, watching one of Zero's movies was the same as watching all of them. God of War had a simple plot. The male lead was an outstanding soldier in the army. The female lead was a reporter. When a certain metropolis encountered an attack by a monster, the female lead headed to the disaster zone to report. In the time of crisis, the male lead led his team to the rescue, beating the monster and saving the beauty in a happy ending. Movies should be enjoyable. Logic goes flying out the window when the movie is taken too seriously. Perhaps due to Zero himself starring in the movie, compared to the previous 7, every single actor and actress, the female lead, and even the extras acted seriously. Every effort was made for the casting as well. Even Zero, whose acting was not that great, put in a lot of hard work. Unlike the 7 movies before, the 8th move was not just an extravagant and pompous affair. On this note, it was a great improvement. However, some sharp-sighted members of the audience could immediately tell the similarly sized Zero from his body double. These naysayers were quick to point out the parts where the body double stood in. Other than the times where Zero's face could be seen, the rest, including his back profile and silhouettes, were done by the body double. Not professional at all, bad review. Halfway through the story, the film focused on the disaster-stricken area under attack from the monster. Billowing clouds of black smoke and large-scale explosions contrasted with the tiny human figures. The flames threatened to consume as the heavy smoke and dust set a suffocating tone. The whole scene looked so realistic. At this moment, those watching this scene had 2 words popping up in their minds: crappy film. Commercial films laden with special effects and a cliché plot were a dime a dozen. One glance was more than enough to know how it would turn out. Especially in the new era where film and television were thriving, a typical film without much logic would be termed by the public as a crappy film. Having watched how the film played out, most people already had a gist of the plot. It was similar to what they had expected. Great. It was about time for Senior Master Zero's lead character to lead his troops to save the day. Most people treated this movie as a joke, and now it was time for the highly anticipated climax that the masses had been waiting all along to laugh at. This movie that Zero had invested in was melodramatic and lacking in logic, but at least it had a stunning atmosphere and special effects. This redeeming factor made the movie easier to endure. Almost there. In a moment you guys can marvel at how the great master steals the thunder. Zero exclaimed as he lay on the sofa, excitedly shaking his legs. At that moment, outside Zero's mansion, a flying transport was descending slowly. For this kind of detached residence, the large garden out front was the landing spot for flying cars and transportation. Zero's housekeeper was busy preparing food and drinks to be brought to the theater. As he saw the descending vehicle, he immediately dropped what he was doing and called out to the rest of the servants in the house to hurry over and welcome the guests. Even though his hair was in a mess, the housekeeper did not raise a finger to fix it. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot as if he were a statue. When the hum of engines died down, the cabin door opened. The housekeeper and servants dropped their heads lower, afraid to make eye contact. Peeking from the corner of their eyes, all they saw was the boots of a few security personnel. An elderly man with a head full of white hair stepped out from the transport. The personal doctor beside him raised a hand to offer his support but was waved away. The elderly man scrutinized the house in front of him with a faint smile. With a slight smile, he sighed. Seems like it has been more than a decade since I last came. Turning to the respectfully waiting housekeeper, he asked, "Is the young punk Zero in?" "The young master is currently in the theater screening the premiere with 7 of his friends," the housekeeper replied politely, his voice wavering softly from the nervousness. "Great," the elderly man said as he walked forward. The housekeeper took a few large strides and opened the doors. Only after the elderly man had entered the room did he raise his head and worriedly glanced across the room. The housekeeper was not worried that Zero might receive a scolding. Rather, he was concerned that Zero might get annoyed at this old man. He was no ordinary man, he was the head of the Renault family. Even up to today, many of Lizhao's top officials paid their respects to the man considered the founding father of Lizhao. This was the man Zero addressed as great-grandfather. This old man still held the most seniority in the Renault family. Despite having stepped down from power quite some time ago, all his glory and title still remained, and people treated him as such. Nowadays, he was no longer involved with the government, but people still respectfully acknowledge him as Old General Renault. As one aged, one's bodily functions deteriorated. Ever since Old General Renault had stepped down, the amount of idle time made it easy to ponder. He thought about his family, wistfully remembered his late wife, and reminisced about his old comrades in arms. That was not a beneficial situation, and thus his doctor had recommended that he should head out more for some fresh air. Staying at home made it easy for him to overthink, which was not necessarily a good thing for someone his age. As for where to go, after some thought, Old General Renault decided to pay a visit to the great-grandson who was always causing trouble for the other members of the Renault family. In front of Old General Renault, the other members of the family only mentioned tactfully that the little brat was lively. The truth, though, was not hard to find out. Although Zero might have been slightly pampered and prone to trouble, as long as his behavior was not out of line, Old General Renault would turn a blind eye. A while back, when Old General Renault went online, he had found that the internet was abuzz with news regarding Zero. Thus, when he went out for some fresh air, he decided to pay his great-grandson a visit. The personal doctor tagging along was a little concerned. He just hoped that Zero would not upset his great-grandfather too much. Originally, the doctor had only planned for 5 members from the dedicated medical team to come along, but after a little consideration, he had decided to increase it to 7 for some added insurance. Of all the relatives he could visit, the old master just had to pick the Zero that could not go a day without stirring up the media. The old master rejected the housekeeper's suggestion to call Zero over. Instead, he walked in the direction pointed out by the housekeeper. He wanted to personally see for himself what his troublemaker great-grandson got up to normally. He also wanted to see the younger generation in their true form. The door to the projection room was slightly ajar. Someone had not closed the door properly after a visit to the washroom. The sounds of rowdy heckling and jeering mixed with the jarring sound effects were seeping out into the doorway. The housekeeper followed behind closely, keeping his head down. His hands were grasped tightly as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. In his heart, he was praying, "Young master, you must absolutely keep your mouth shut, do not say anything out of line. Even if you have to talk big, please do not do so now." The old master stood in the doorway, leaning on his crane. Even though his aged figure made him appear hunched, standing there, he seemed like a huge boulder that could not be shaken. His personal doctor was paying close attention to his every expression. He knew what that bunch were like every other day and was worried it would affect the old master. More than 10 people stood outside the doorway, not making a single sound. The tension in the entire house was stifling. The staff in charge of cleaning were shaking with fear and every single action was done cautiously. Thus, the sound of activity coming from the projection room was clear and distinct. Inside, the oblivious Zero was bragging about his own acting experience. "I don't mean to show off, but when I was acting, I think I displayed the same demeanor as my great-grandfather back in those days. Aren't they alike? Not everyone can act out the vigor." The others hooted in agreement as Zero continued his bragging. Yet they clearly knew what they had seen. The figure that just leapt into the flying vehicle was obviously the body double. In the movie, numerous troops were heading for the disaster zone. The other movies that Zero had worked on might have lacked logic, but for this movie, with all the real military equipment and weapons, they could not afford to be careless. Of course, the real equipment only accounted for a small portion, as computer-generated special effects made up the rest. Having actual military equipment according to the scale of the movie would have been considered a military operation rather than shooting a movie. The scene now showed all sorts of aircraft and flying vehicles dispatched by the Air Force. As the grand spectacle unfolded, a timpani started beating in the background, gradually rising in volume. A shrill whistle from some sort of horn abruptly rang out, jolting the senses of audiences everywhere. As if an electrical current had just run through them, the languid audience was now alert and excited. The roars of the aircraft, together with an orchestra in the background, created a vast, majestic atmosphere. A brass march frantically alternated with a woodwind score to the clash between humans and monsters. The realism was stunning and, when combined perfectly with the accompanying music, was a non-stop auditory and visual barrage for the viewers. Haha. How is it? Can you feel the God of War vibes? Ah, here it is? I'm exiting the plane. Everyone in the project room straightened up and watched the scene attentively. The door of a transport aircraft opened, revealing the soldiers inside who were armed to the teeth. A close-up of Zero's character followed before he donned a pair of goggles and led his squad to rappel out of the aircraft. And after that, there was no after. Only half of Zero's face had been shown when he was exiting the aircraft. The following stunts of rappelling out of the aircraft had been done by the body double. No matter how badly the others in the projection room wanted to ridicule Zero, all that came out from their mouths was praise. Outside, the doctor could guess what all the flattering was about. Oh, right. The young master's movie was called God of War. How thick-skinned can he get? How could the soldiers in the movie measure up to the real God of War division? Humphy. The real God of War is right here. The housekeeper dropped his head even lower, hoping the ground would open up and swallow him. The personal doctor glanced quickly at the old master's face. Any traces of a smile had all but disappeared off his face. However, he did not look angry. Rather, he seemed deep in thought. He was not paying heed to the young master. Instead, the old master was deeply engrossed in the sounds that were coming out. He might have been old, but he certainly was not deaf. Even without watching the movie, he could differentiate the models of aircraft, fighters, and bombers just from the roars of the engines. From the explosions, he could tell the cannon model and the armor plating of the tanks as well as the type of munitions that were being used. Even after leaving the battlefield for a long time, he still kept an eye on the happenings in the military. Expecting to have forgotten all these, the memories that came back were clear as day. Beside him, the equipment for monitoring the health of the old master started beeping out warnings. General. The doctor realized something was amiss. Veins were appearing on the hands tightly gripping the cane. That wrinkled face was trembling slightly as if he was enduring an immense pain. General. How are you feeling? The doctor was worried. The old master's recent mental state had not been great, and at his age, even the doctor did not know how such a change might affect him. Old General Renault just stood there, not making a sound. It seemed like he could not hear the doctor's words. He stood gazing into the distance, as if attentively listening to something, as if reminiscing. His eyes were red and watery. As the background music and sound effects reached a climax, he closed his eyes as the tears freely flowed. His entire body started trembling uncontrollably. The doctor was at a loss. Ever since he'd taken over the job from his own father, he had never seen the old master in this state before. FCK. This is bad. Medical team. Hurry. Only the personal doctor had followed the old master. The rest of the medical team were on the transport standing by. Upon receiving the call, the medical team rushed into the house. As the door of the projection room was not closed, the sudden commotion could be heard by those inside. Zero had a bad feeling about this. Stepping out into the doorway and witnessing the scene, he felt an icy cold wind running through him. His legs turned weak as he knelt down in the doorway. It's over. I'm finished, Zero thought to himself. He had made the most senior Renault shed anguished tears. In Wireless Media's headquarters, after the premiere of God of War, Zero's manager and a few other senior executives were checking the ratings of the movie online. 5 points. Seeing this, a few of them double-checked to make sure their eyes were not playing tricks on them. Upon further inspection, there were already more than 300 reviews for the movie. After a quick check of their IDs, they found that amongst them were the reviews of some reputable film critics as well. Glancing once more at the rating, they slowly counted each and every star. Their eyes had not deceived them. 5 stars. A full 5 stars. It was inconceivable. How could a movie with a crappy plot receive such rave reviews? A rating of 5 was only half of a perfect rating of 10. Whether the film was good or bad, the rating was only given after watching the movie. Movies similar to God of War termed by the masses as a crappy film would normally receive a rating of about 3 stars. That was the average rating Zero's previous 7 films had received. The 5-star rating was still not comparable to the 8.6 rating of King of Snipers, yet when compared to Wireless Media's previous productions, this was an unprecedentedly high rating indeed. In the eyes of Zero's team, 5 stars was very high. This was the highest rating ever received for one of Zero's productions. Screenshot it. Take a photo. This was solid proof. Zero's agent was worried that the system had experienced some errors, hence the high ratings. He trusted the reviews of the critics, but this high rating was just beyond his expectations. Every username was tied to the user's terminal. A large influx of fake fans was also impossible. If there were too many obvious fake fans, an investigation would take place. What called for the high ratings? Are you f***ing kidding me? God of War has a rating of 5. There is something suspicious going on. Already 5.1 stars and still rising. Where are the ones who caught the movie immediately after it was released? Shed some light on the truth. I just watched the premiere. How do I put it in words? Rather straightforward with a crappy plot. Yet it was really cool. Especially the stunning spectacle of the final battle. I give it 5.5 stars. The visuals of Senior Master Zero's movies are always more or less satisfactory. Just that this time it left a profound impression on me, perhaps due to the soundtrack. I originally wanted to give it 3 stars, but on account of the amazing soundtrack, I made it 5. Amongst those voicing their opinions, there were also professional critics who were rather famous. My rating is 5.5 stars. The plot deserves only 1 star, as everyone should be able to tell. Production deserves 2.5 stars. Compared to the previous works, there has been an improvement, especially the acting. Although not great, it is evident that they were serious about their craft. I gave 2 stars for the previous 7 movies. This time, based on the same criteria, the movie would have received 3.5 stars on the account of their improvement. Alas, what prompted me to give an extra 2 stars was that short but exquisite soundtrack. I am sure others in the industry have given an extra 2 stars as well just for the music. Indeed. Another reputable film critic chipped in. The soundtrack of a film is an important component when it comes to making a film. Without a soundtrack, a movie is just like an empty shell. Music can accentuate a story, draw out emotions, and shape perceptions. Great soundtracks can enhance a film. Just try remembering all the classical greats. Most people might have forgotten how the plot goes, but the epic soundtracks will remain everlasting. The soundtrack in the climax of God of War was indeed breathtaking. During my university days, I minored in movie soundtracks. Thus, from a professional view, I was unable to detect any flaws. That piece brought out the essence of the joys and sorrows of the battle. The bloodshed and glory were all nicely depicted. I just wish to know which great composer produced this masterpiece. To anyone in the industry who has such information, I will be waiting online for any news. Due to protectionist measures, in Lizhou, music from other continents was not distributed freely. Most people in Lizhou were not familiar with the Period of Destruction series. Even with the big hoo-ha of the second movement, the news here was censored. Therefore, some people did not even know of the existence of the virtual idol Polar Light. As the release of the third movement and the premiere of God of War had happened simultaneously, even though there might have been a minority that followed the music industry in Yanzhou, those that had listened to the song had not watched the movie. At the moment, nobody had deduced the source or the composer of the soundtrack yet. Some people thought that the soundtrack would be under the film's copyright and would not appear anywhere else. Therefore, in order to hear it, they had no choice but to watch God of War. There were also soundtrack enthusiasts who went to watch God of War a second time. A large number who saw the reviews online decided to catch it too. Thus, during the second screening of the movie, Zero's agent and production team realized that the second screening had even more viewers than the premiere. This had never happened before with the 7 previous movies. This was a happy occasion. It called for a celebration. Zero's agent tried calling Zero to pass on the good news. However, Zero was totally uncontactable. Finding Zero uncontactable, he moved on to contacting the members in Zero's social circle. Alas, not a single one could be contacted. Had some sort of accident occurred? Thoughts of kidnapping, blackmail, and hostage situations flashed across the mind of Zero's agent, and he nearly wanted to make a police report, but after remembering that Zero was a member of the Renault family, the agent made a call to an uncle of Zero's. From that uncle, he received the news that Zero and his friends were at home and was told not to worry. Refusing to comment further, the uncle hung up. Zero's agent could tell that something was amiss. Could it be that something had happened? At the same time, in Zero's residence, Zero's friends were seated quietly in the projection room. All communication devices on hand had been confiscated and they were not allowed to leave. Even a trip to the bathroom required someone to follow them. 2 armed security personnel were standing in the doorway, giving off icy stares. No matter which family they belonged to, there would be no such preferential treatment given. The bunch of them sat in fear, afraid to even make a single sound. None of them even knew what had happened. At that moment, nobody had even dared to go out. All they saw was Zero kneeling down moments after opening the door, all hints of his normally insolent attitude gone. Before they even had time to look out, security personnel had already entered the room with their guns raised. In the Renault family, quite a few members were able to boast of having armed security personnel tag along. Yet given Zero's reaction and the tense atmosphere in the house, it was highly likely that the rarely seen old General Renault was here. But why would the old general even be here? To visit Zero? Given the current situation and seeing the gun-wielding security personnel, one of them came to a conclusion: something had happened to old General Renault. The health and well-being of this very important person was an important affair. Before the Renault family had done any preparations, it was important that no information was to be leaked. Therefore, even if Zero's friends had not seen anything, their communication devices had to be confiscated and they had to be confined to the room. Why had old General Renault suddenly encountered a health problem? Seeing Zero's kneeling figure, perhaps Zero had angered the old man and triggered a reaction. At the thought, the friend shivered. All he could do was offer Zero his condolences. If Zero had indeed offended the old general, even if he was the beloved grandson of Li Zhao's current governor, Zero would not be spared. At the moment, Zero was very pale. He was still kneeling, but at the doorway of another room. He did not know what was happening inside right now, but seeing the situation with his great-grandfather just now, he did not have high hopes. 5 other members of the Renault family were already in the house. They were his uncles and aunts. The Renaults of his grandfather's generation held important positions and were unable to set aside everything and rush over. Zero's father had also rushed over. After confirming that the old master's life was no longer in danger, he proceeded to rip into Zero. In the past, whenever Zero's father had scolded him, there would always be others to intercede. This time, nobody even bothered. Zero's mother sat to one side, her face fraught with worry. When she tried to interject, she was stopped by one of Zero's aunts. The members of the family did not know the entire story, but considering Zero's past actions, they came to the conclusion that Zero was at fault for the old general's current condition. Sporting a bruised face, Zero sobbed silently while still kneeling. Any trace of his arrogant manner was gone. Zero might have been pampered, but he had a conscience. He had not wished for such a situation. Even he did not know what had caused his great-grandfather so much anguish. Could it have been the bragging he had done in the projection room? If he had known that the old man had been standing outside, he would not have dared to say anything. As he knelt there sobbing, the door opened. His father gave him a cold stare and said, "Old master wishes to speak to you." Zero blew his nose, grabbing onto the doorframe to support himself as he got up. After contemplating, he decided to go back to kneeling and, in that position, shuffled into the room. The old master had his back to the door, so Zero could not see his expression. All he could do under the icy cold stares of his elders was tremble. "Gr great-grandfather," Zero mumbled softly. Having prepared himself for whatever punishment might come, Zero instead heard something totally unexpected. "That song. What is its title?" the old master asked. Zero grimaced. The others in the room were bewildered as well. "What a? Hurry up and answer," Zero's father said as he rasped his knuckles down onto the top of Zero's head. "Oh." Zero relaxed a little and tried to think. At that moment, it should have been the part where he was acting. The soundtrack was titled Me Mission. That piece was called Mission, Zero hurriedly said. "Mission," the old master repeated the word with a longing gaze and a light sigh. "Like and subscribe."